Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and today we're looking at Zethy, Arcane Blademaster, a blue-white Spellslinger deck built off of, or a different version of, Chun-Li. So this is the universe within of Chun-Li, and it's a really fun commander. This is our donation deck of the day. It comes from Shirok. Thank you so much for supporting the channel, Shirok. And they say, the deck seems to be in a fine place, but I know it can be improved upon sanding down the rough edges on it and raising its power a bit. I'm looking for a second set of eyes on where improvements can be made. And their budget is limit on each additional card, $25. And I think I do make that. I might have one that's close, but the rest should be fine. And I have a lot to say about Zethi. I think this deck is really strong, and I think this is a very strong commander that's fun to play with a very unique mechanic. I did like all the Street Fighter characters, and I'm very excited that they all had Universe Within versions, because there's definitely some cool stuff to be done. And I'm trying to think if there's any other updates. We've passed 400 subscribers. That's really cool, and I don't know, I have a few projects working on this, and I think we're almost at 200 videos. Once we hit that, I'll do another update, probably before the end of the year, but we'll get to that in time. I'll have a different video for that. But first, let's look at Zethy. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Zethy Arcane Blademaster? And why are they the commander of our blue-white Spellslinger deck? They are 3 mana with white and blue, 3/3 human soldiers, so pretty good stats already. They have multi-kicker for a white or blue hybrid. They say when they enter the battlefield, you exile up to X target instant cards from your graveyard, where X is the number of times Zethy was kicked, and each of those cards get a kick counter on them. Then, whenever they attack, copy each exiled card you own with a kick counter on it. You may cast the copies. Now, this is notable that you still have to pay for the copies, so you can't really, use this to cheat very big spells out, but you can use Zethy to kind of create a form of advantage by consistently casting the same spells over and over, the same lower mana spells. And this is exactly what this deck aims to do, and I'm very impressed by that. I guess let's just look at the deck. Now you'll note that a very helpful commenter mentioned that I could be putting Moxfield into dark mode. I wonder if I could full screen this too. These are the things I think about, but I absolutely I didn't realize there was a dark mode. This is so much nicer. Thank you so much. Let me see. So our deck here is really nice. There's a lot of it I really do like. I really like the low mana cost of our instants. I like, we've got a few combo wins. I would say Aetherflux Reservoir is our main win condition. We have a lot of ways to protect our commander, some Countermagic, and some nice value creatures here. We also have a lot of really interesting board clears, and I think this is the most I really like this idea, is that all of these board clears selectively keep our commander alive. And I think this is great because usually this isn't the case. Usually we do really want to wipe the board, but I think the fact that Time Wipe is the only one that actually does, but the rest of them keeping our commander out is just really nice because that's our main way of getting card advantage. They are a bit rougher when we don't have our commander out, but I think that's fine. Time Wipe is really interesting because we do want to bounce our commander back into our hand when possible, to which we have a few other cards that do so, but when we do, we can cast her again and multi-kick a few more cards into exile, which is really nice. But I do also really like single combat here, because this is the exact kind of deck I love single combat in. I think the last time I saw it, it was just in kind of I believe an equipment deck. And though there are equipment cards, and I'm going to add a few more into this deck, I do really think that single combat is very good in decks that you just don't care to cast creatures. And I think this is exactly where I like it. So with that in mind, this is just a fantastic addition here. Looking at the curve, I think the curve is just really, really nice. Ends at 7 with Hullbreaker Horror because Sage is actually 2 mana less, and Sphinx Bone Wand. So Hullbreaker Horror and Sphinx Bone Wand, both of which are very, very good cards. Sphinx Bone Wand does feel a lot to cast for me, but there's not anything that really does what it does as well. I saw a few cards that do things similarly, but not exactly. And for that reason, I'm not going to touch the Bone Wand. I think it's close. I'm not going to lie. I do think there are times that this card is just not going to do anything, but when it does something, it does it really, really well. It works almost like that Phoenix card, I can't remember what it is, but there's a card from one of the Modern Horizons, I believe, that gains an opponent like 10 life, and that every time you cast a spell, you put a charge counter, and then you deal that much damage to each opponent, is my memory. And Sphinx Bone Wand is very, very close, albeit not in red, which is ideal for us. So I really do like this card. I will have to see how strong it is. And the rest of the deck just looks really nice. I do really like it. Obviously, when you cast these exiled cards, you get to play alternative mana costs, such as returning 2 islands for Gush, or being able to cast the overload cost of Cyclonic Rift. This is just really, really fantastic. I'm just generally very, very impressed. So let's get picky. Let's look at the things that I would like to kind of cut down on and what I think should be changed. As lands are kind of a conversation we're having these days, I wouldn't mind going up to 35. Like, we're trying to cast Sphinx Bone Wand every, 3 or 4 games, and going up to 35 lands should be fine for that. We do draw a lot, but it never hurts to make sure you hit your land drops. So personally, especially something like Mystic Sanctuary, you really want to be able to trigger this. I definitely want another land, especially when we're playing Maze of Ith, which, as a reminder, is not a land, right? It does not tap for mana. So technically we're at 33, so I wouldn't mind 1 or 2 lands to get us to 35. I think that would just be nice. I just really prefer games that we get to do what we want and not having to wait for mana. Looking at our artifacts, I'm generally happy. I'm going to come back to Crawl Space. No, let's talk about Crawl Space now. So Crawl Space, and somewhere here we have Silent Arbiter. Now this is interesting to me because I do like these cards, but I don't really see this deck being a defensive deck. If you think about it in the sense that the higher up we go in power level, the less useful these cards are. Silent Arbiter and Crawl Space do not prevent one attacker, which is usually more often what you see in really, really powerful decks. And in addition, let's see. So I like Silent Arbiter more because it prevents your opponents from attacking each other profitably, which can be a lot better. But Crawl Space only really stops them from attacking you with more than 2 creatures. And there's a lot of situations where you're definitely going to get attacked by 2 or more creatures, and that's 2 or less creatures, and that's exactly what they wanted. They'll get their value, damage hits on combat damage triggers off other opponents if they need to, and if they feel pressured by you, which they probably will knowing your deck, since you have a long buildup, they might just send the one biggest thing at you because you don't have a lot of profitable blocks early on in the game. Once you have a lot of your makes tokens or freezes creatures, then you're able to get that through, and you're able to lock down your opponents, and I think that's fine. With that in mind, I do wonder how much I'd rather have this be Propaganda or Ghostly Prison. I'm not usually a big fan of these cards, but in a deck like this, they do really, really well, because the entire purpose is to slow down your opponents, and I believe compared to Crawl Space, they'll do a little better, because later in the game, they're just not going to attack you anyways because you have tokens, and early on in the game, that kind of pressure on their mana is just a lot more powerful than Crawl Space. So that's something I would consider. I think it's pretty similar. It would take a lot of testing to find out which one is stronger, but in my heart, I do really want at least Propaganda in here. I think we're more base blue, yeah. So at least Propaganda here, and then to see how that goes. Looking through Looking through our instance, there's not many that I don't like. There's a few I want to change, and I think I already put it in my list of suggestions, but this should be Stroke of Midnight. Is it here? Yeah, it's here. So I'll get to that soon. Let's see. So something like, where are you? Deprive. So Deprive is really interesting here because I do get how it works with something like Mystic Sanctuary to be very, very good. Where turn after turn, you are returning Mystic Sanctuary, you are playing Mystic Sanctuary, and then you are, with that in mind, being able to put more cards on top of your deck, drawing them and getting further in the game. And I think that's the main land you want to return. I don't think there's anything else that you... Yeah, so that's the one. And with that in mind, I don't know if I love this, because this is a very expensive counterspell in the deck otherwise. Expensive in like tempo cost, right? Because every time you do this, you lose your land drop. You basically stay neutral. And I think it's very likely for you, especially if we add 2 more lands, but you should be able to make your land drop every single turn. You have so much draw, you have so much card advantage. I think it's very high, like a very high chance you're just going to be constantly hitting your lands, which is really good for your deck because you need to get that much mana together to cast these spells. But also, like, the thing about Deprive, right, is our counter magic is kind of worse under Chun-Li or under Zethy, because you have to choose to cast them on attack trigger. So all of your counter magic, obviously you'll never put under Zethy, but with that in mind, it just makes it really, really tricky to have this much counter magic. So to have Deprive, which I feel is one of the weaker ones here, I think this is the one that stands out to me. The rest I think are very, very good. They're good at protecting your commander. Dovin's Veto I think is just phenomenal here. But the rest I'm just kind of less, Deprive, I'm just a little less impressed by. Permission Denied, I think, is very good. I have to keep reading this one, but I think it's very, very good. The rest, I think, are clean and nice and strong. I especially like the fact that because it's an attack trigger, you can cast, where's that Shadow Rift, and immediately give your commander Shadow while drawing a card. I think this is one of the stronger cards I'd like to, put a kick counter on. So instants are very nice. Sorceries, like I said, I'm very impressed by. Merchant Scroll is good. Unfortunately, it's a sorcery. I wish it was an instant. Mystical Tutor kind of holds that spot, and I think Merchant Scroll... I wonder how often it just tutors for Mystical Tutor, because the upside of being able to Mystical Tutor several times is just really, really good, right? Because you set up your card so you cast Mystic Tutor first, and then you consider or opt or what have you to put it into your hand immediately. So you're basically tutoring minus a draw. I think it works really, really well here. All right. Looking at creatures, I do have a few notes, I think. So Burnished Heart just doesn't feel like it belongs in this deck. This is very similar to what I have to say about Solemn Simulacrum. This is a creature that used to be played a lot, but no longer is, and if you cannot cheat its costs, I don't think it's very, very worthwhile. This is 6 mana to ramp twice, and I recognize we're in a situation where ramping is kind of difficult, but I have a much better suggestion in the to put in instead of this, and we can do a lot better than 6 mana to get 2 islands tapped, right? Or an island and a plains tapped. I think we can do much, much better. So this is a very, very clunky card, especially in this deck, and I think we can toss it out really, really easily. Looking at our others, I feel like, yeah, so the higher mana ones are catching my eye. Docent of Perfection, I hope that's how you pronounce it, though I do love this card, don't get me wrong. I love this art of it becoming an Eldrazi insect. It's just so horrifying. However, I just do think you can do better, right? Like, this is 5 mana to get this effect, and don't get me wrong, both sides are really, really cool. I do like that it makes basically 3/2s, and it makes them very, very quickly. It's still a lot of mana for this effect. And like, let's just compare it, for example, to Shark Typhoon, which is more mana, but comes with an alternative casting cost or a cycling cost, right? So that if you ever get into a situation that you cannot actually cast this card profitably, You can just cycle it, draw a card, get a creature, and move on. And I really, really do like that. Whereas Docent of Perfection, you gotta play it fairly, especially in this deck. It's just really, really hard not to just to get yourself in a situation to cast this and get a bunch of other casts in the same turn without it getting destroyed. So I don't particularly love that. I think we have enough token generation at the lower end already, and I think I might suggest one more, but I think Docent of Perfection's a bit much. Likewise, Sun Quan is really, really good, but at 6 mana to make all your creatures unblockable is just not really ideal. I think a lot already, like a few of your cards, let's see, Talrand, wow. Talrand, Murmuring Mystic, both of these create evasive creatures, and Monastery Mentor creates very, very big creatures due to them having prowess. So then making them unblockable is really only worthwhile for Monastery Mentor, which, don't get me wrong, is really strong. But for the other ways that we generate tokens, it's just kind of meaningless. I do get the benefit that this makes your commander unblockable, and that's really strong. But 6 mana is just so much. You were talking about sanding down or smoothing down the edges. This is an edge. This is an edge that, doesn't really win you games. It feels really, really strong when the stars align. It's a win more card, right? If you have enough creatures and you have enough protection and you have enough mana that you can cast a 6 mana creature, hold up other spells, and say, now with this attack, I can defeat all my opponents, you are already winning the game, right? So Sun Quan, I think, is just too much for the deck. Hullbreaker Horror, I said this earlier, I really, really do like Hullbreaker Horror, especially in a deck like this. I think it's very, very strong, so I have no problem with this being our other 7 mana spell that we keep. Sage of the Beyond, however, I think, even though I get that it's not 7 mana, it's actually 2 and 5, I'm going to suggest some other directions to do this. Spells you cast from anywhere other than your hand cost 2 less to cast. I will admit, I didn't quite think that this affects our commander, which is neat. I will say that's not nothing. However, I think that's really it. So here's the thing. This does almost nothing for half of our instant spells, and it does less, it does okay for a bunch of 2 mana spells, but not all of them. Counterspell, Deprive, Dovin's Veto, Permission Denied. All of these don't reduce in cost. So really, we're using this for Frantic Search, Generous Gift, Teferi's Protection, and Gush. Gush is the one that I like the most. It does turn it into Divination, but it's still, it's still something, so you don't have to go down on lands. With that in mind, though, I think we can do better. It's not like this card is really going to beat face, because you're casting this just to have it in play and have the effect. So I think I have better suggestions there. So I would probably put this on my cut list. Looking at the rest, looking at the artifacts, like I said, I do have some suggestions coming in for equipment. I think the one that just catches my eye the most is, Navigation Orb, once again, I feel like we can do better than a 5 mana Kodama's Reach, right? Yeah, we can do better than that, so I still don't want to do this. I'm going to try to suggest one more, but I do recognize that we're getting close to not having any ramp. I think I would just prefer, you have Talisman of Progress. You don't seem to have the other Signet. You don't have Azorius Signet. I think I would play Felwar Stone or Azorius Signet, probably the Felwar Stone here, before I would play the Navigation Orb, because I'd rather have that mana immediately, because you have so many 1 mana think about it like this. Even if this card was 2 mana, let's say, on turn 2, you don't want to play a card like this. You don't want to tap out, because you have so many meaningful casts at 1 mana that you want to cast Talisman of Progress, or the equivalent of casting Felwar Stone, with the idea that it's very likely someone's playing blue, right? And with that in mind, then you can hold up all these different cards and be able to protect yourself and continue playing, whereas Navigation Orb is like, you have to commit, much like Burnished Heart, you have to commit a large amount of mana to it with no sign of whether or not you needed to do that turn. If we're playing at a high power level and my blue opponent taps out for Navigation Orb, Whoo boy, am I in a good mood. And you might say, but cursed, no one's casting Navigation Orb like when it taps them completely out. They're casting it with 2 additional or more mana. And if it's like turn 5 or 6 and you've spent 3 mana on this, I am so happy. Like, as your opponent, I am very, very glad. I'd rather you keep none of your mana up, so wasting your mana on this cast with the idea of getting 1 land tapped and 1 land in hand. Nom, 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 nom. It's so good for me. So don't do this. Instead, I think a mana rock that instantly taps for blue so that you can immediately, like, at least cast one of these spells, at least represent some interaction. Let's see. Is there anything else, really? The thing is, I have a lot of suggestions, and I was hoping to cut out more, but I do really like the deck, right? So I'm having a hard time. I think maybe we could cut down 1 board clear, maybe even 2. I don't know if you need 4. 4 is a lot. You have a lot of protection from large groups of creatures, and I don't know if you need that much. I think you could easily cut Divine Reckoning and slash the ranks and keep single combat and time wipe. So that's my opinion on that. But regardless, let's go into additions, because maybe you just won't take all the additions, but there's some interesting things here that I want to play around with. So one of the things I wanted to say is I kind of like the equipment package here. I think it's really, really valuable to give Zethi or Chun-Li haste, and it's very valuable to give them Shroud. So immediately, like, something like Lightning Greaves is something I want to cast. Oh, actually, let's go back here. Vesuvan Diplomacy. I don't know if this is good enough. I think it's really, really interesting. I think it does something kind of neat, but I don't think we have enough ways to proc it outside of like Shadow Rift and removal, to be honest. And I don't think we have enough ways to target like Sphinx Bone Wand. So I would take it out in this current build, but if you want to change it up and have other cards, I know there's another one that's You Come to the Rivers, another one that does this, but we don't have enough, and I would like a few more, because this could be really, really, really strong, but at the moment it's not. So if you want to keep this, you have to kind of have to build more towards it, but I do think it can be really strong. Okay, sorry. Coming back here, because Lightning Greaves, I assume, is not in the deck because of that card, because with Shroud, you can't target your own commander. However, this I feel is almost essential. This just needs to be in the deck. The haste, the Shroud, it's just so strong. I know it's going to stop you from playing with a few things with your commander, but the upside of having this out and being able to immediately, reap the benefits of getting Shroud, I think it's going to be worth it so much. Another equipment is Bitter Thorn. Sorry. The THs are hard today. Bitter Thorn is just really, you're playing sort of the Animus. I would rather Bitter Thorn than Burnished Heart. You cast it, you attack with it, you immediately get a land tapped, and you're really happy. Then later you can equip it to your commander to give it just another +1/+1 to get the trigger every time. This is a deck that likes to attack. Give yourself reasons to attack, and Bitter Thorn is a very good reason. Just the ability to just keep ramping, I think, is just very big in this deck. And if you want that 3 mana, like, consistent, like, Burnished Heart effect, this just needs to attack twice, and you've got that bonus. So I like it a lot more. Then a few things I was thinking, because once again, going back to the idea of like Swiftfoot Boots, Lightning Greaves, Robe of Stars, Champion's Helm, even, these are cards I really, really want. And so I don't mind playing one or two tutor spells in order to get them. I think Steel Shaper's Gift is the one I'd play, but of course Open the Armory is cheaper, though I can see this only came, it just got reprinted, that's why. So at $3, this is probably the best one you can play. Immediately tutor something into play. However, alternatively, if you're going into more of a, like, if you're willing to throw them in the graveyard, Forge Anew is possibly better because it represents an equip every single turn. I'm playing with this in Modern Hammer time. It's very, very good. It is stupid what you can do with this, especially because it enables you to, once you have Forge Anew down, you've got your equipment going, you can kind of leave things like Lightning Greaves to the side when you don't need them. And then whenever your opponent tries to interact with your commander while you have Forge Anew out and Lightning Greaves unattached, you can attach it at instant speed. Even more, you can attach this at sorcery speed, and if your opponent tries to target it, you just then attach it at instant speed, negating the interaction, which I think is very, very good. There's a few other things you can do with that I think are interesting, but I think Forge Anew could have a place here, but this is kind of something that caught my eye, but is not necessary. All right, let's see what else I can suggest. So I said before, Stroke of Midnight. I think it's just better if you're looking to repeatedly use this effect, you're never gonna start burning people out of lands, right? The idea is that eventually you're going to, like, one of the upside of Generous Gift is that it hits lands, and if you just keep doing it over and over again, we might say, hey, wow, I can just start blowing lands up. It's not going to get to that. You're only doing it one additional time a turn. Stroke of Midnight, you're just going to be happier giving them 1/1s. Those 3/3s can trade with your commander, and you don't like that. Stroke of Midnight, it's a lot harder, and you're just going to have a lot of things that you can destroy. So you'll be very, very happy with this, I would say. And yeah, just a nice, easy change. Another one of 3 mana that I think is interesting is Quick Study. It's just Divination. It's just Divination. However, if we can reduce the mana cost, which once again, I will have, I think 1 or 2 or 3 suggestions on that. We'll see, we'll get there. If you can reduce the mana cost, 1 mana draw 2 or 2 mana draw 2 is just really, really good. So this is already just, I think, a very, very playable card. It's just a better Divination, and it doesn't, it's just easy on certain turns when you're behind, when you're ahead and you have excess mana. Quick Study is just going to be really, really nice. I think you're just going to be very happy with it. Something a little higher mana that I think is worth considering is Fact or Fiction. Not just because this is the greatest face I've ever seen in to be presented with moldy books, but just because it's a good card. If you've not played with FOF, it's just so good. And in a deck like this where you absolutely want to dump all of these cards into your graveyard, and you want to get advantage, because this card tends to draw you at least 3 cards, or at least 2 cards most of the time, but it's just really, really good. I think you're going to be very happy with this. Being able to cast it from the graveyard or from exile is just going to be really nice. I think this is just a very, very powerful card. Now we've got a few kind of really interesting cards that I was thinking of playing with this deck. This deck has given me a lot of inspiration. I really like it. If I haven't mentioned this enough, I think Zethi and Chun-Li are really, really cool cards. So I do really like this deck. So let's start off with the weirder of the 2, or I guess 3, Mercurial Spelldancer. This is a card that for a hot second, some people were speculating whether or not it was really, really good. Though I have a friend who speculates on the most ridiculous things, so it might have just been him. But the idea is that as you cast non-creature spells, you get oil counters. And then whenever Mercurial Spelldancer hits, which it can't be blocked, it then, if you have 2 oil counters, the next instant or sorcery you hit will get doubled. So here's the thing. It kind of works and it kind of doesn't. The way it doesn't work is that it can't copy the cards that have kick counters on them, because those cards are being cast on attack and not on damage, which is when Mercurial Spelldancer's ability triggers. So it is limited in that way. However, we are a Spellslinger deck, and this is a very good Spellslinger card. It just enables you to get extra value off of a spell, every now and then, or if you're casting hard enough, every turn, one of your spells, as long as this hits, which it should, will get you a copy. And for me, that's good enough. It's not attacks, how do I put this? It enables your deck in a way that your commander doesn't, which is something that's really important in these kind of decks, because you can't go all in on your strategy. And Mercurial Spelldancer gives you a pivot that you can use just with it, but still a way to get extra value out of cards. And it allows you to just get extra value from even things like Opt, right? It doesn't have to be the biggest things. It doesn't have to be like Pognify or Generous Gift or Stroke of Midnight, where you're like, whoa, I'm going to get 2 different removal spells out of this. Sometimes you're fine just casting Opt. Sometimes you're fine just getting Quick Study out and drawing 4 cards. And I think that's rather good. So I think this is just a really nice low mana, proactive plan that I think rarely you're going to be sad with. It is not that great when you're behind. It is a blocker. It's not that great when you're ahead because you're already winning the game, but I think that's fine. This is very good in neutral. This is very good in setup, and this is just I think a pretty good card worth playing. But 2 cards that I think are much more straightforward would be Baral, Chief of Compliance. Straight up just reducing the cost of all your instant and sorcery spells. This is much more reasonable to me at 2 mana. This is a card your opponents will, target with removal, but I mean, a lot of your deck is going to be targeted with removal. I think it just makes a pretty big difference of being able to reduce that 1 mana. And there'll be others, but I think this one's a very strong one. And then I think Snapcaster Mage, because it's the cheapest it's ever been at like $15 here. So I think absolutely, if you have a copy, if you can get a copy, this is the kind of deck that loves Snapcaster Mage. You're not going to be able to exile all the cards from your graveyard to your commander, and Snapcaster Mage works really well with Countermagic, and you're not going to be exiling Countermagic. So this is a great reason or a great niche that this card fits into the deck. Something else I was thinking of is a different way to create creatures, because a lot of our creature creation feels like it's at 4 mana or higher. Chrome Host Seed Shark. Now I know this isn't as popular as the others because it doesn't create the creatures, it incubates, but there are some benefits to that. It does allow you to have a mana sink. Not that this deck, really needs one, but it's still important to consider. But it gives you that mana sink, and it allows that mana sink to basically be pumped into a bunch of creatures and to provide some kind of really aggressive attacks. However, now I'm thinking about it, I'm a little less impressed about it because the cards that we're creating will create 1/1s or 2/2s. Is that still worth it? Maybe not. Maybe I'm changing my mind. The main thing I like about them is that they'll survive board clears, and therefore once you basically play the Chrome Host and you forget about it, and you generate as many incubation tokens as you can, and inevitably when the board is wiped, if you're very far behind, you just burn all your mana into this army and get at least a few profitable attacks in. Is that worth it? I don't know, but the Seed Shark has a great body. 2/4 flying is really good, and I think you'll be happy. I didn't think the year would end with me telling a shark that it has a great body, but here we are. All right, so let's go for the last few things. Okay, I've got 2 other mana reducers that I'm not as interested in, but I did want to note them. They're the cheap version of the final mana reducer, but they're still worth considering. So Mind Splice Apparatus and Font of Magic. You would play one, you wouldn't play both, but they do similar things. Mind Splice, you flash it in, each upkeep, all your instants and sorceries from that point on will cost 1 less. Now, I think some decks want to proliferate that, get it as high as possible. I think after the first one, you're probably really happy. It's pretty strong, and I think that's all you need. Is you need to cast this, you put that first oil counter, and then you forget about it. The second it has 2, you're like obviously really happy, but here I think just the 1 is more than enough. And in the same font, in the same idea, Font of Magic is instants and sorceries, but it will cost 1 less for each time you cast your commander. From the command zone, which is notable. Maybe I like this less because of well, it also doesn't have flash, so I probably like this less, but if you bounce and cast your commander again, it will not gain, it doesn't gain counters, but the equivalent, like it doesn't gain additional reduction. So yeah, maybe just don't play this. If you're going to play one, yeah, definitely play the Apparatus. I'm just going to close that one. The Apparatus is definitely better, but it is a bit of a budget choice, to which I think the superior card is coming right now. And that superior card is Sapphire Medallion. So Sapphire Medallion, of course, is much stronger, but has more of a price tag of being about $10 American. But it reduces the cost of your commander. It reduces the cost of all of your cards, almost all of your cards, and almost all of your instant I said all of your cards in a 2-color deck. The majority of your cards are blue, and it's going to reduce the cost, and it's going to reduce the cost of a lot of your instants and sorceries, not including your creatures, not including 2 enchantments. I think this is the kind of deck that really would benefit from it. Sapphire Medallion gets really, really strong when you cast multiple spells in a turn. And this is definitely the kind of deck that wants to do this. Just turn after turn, casting as many as you can, and Sapphire Medallion will be very, very happy. All right, I have 2 more suggestions. One is really straightforward, and the other is a little trickier, but Smothering Tithe, I thought this was going to be closer to $25, but it seems to be about $20. This deck could use Smothering Tithe. You would really benefit from more mana, and Smothering Tithe is here for you to create more mana in your deck. It's a bit of a boring inclusion, I know, but it's also a very, very strong inclusion. So, I mean, go off. This is a great card. You can do a lot with the treasure, and if you want, you could also run some wheels to kind of get more advantage out of this. I don't know how many instant speed wheels there are, if any, but they would work really well here, so yeah, that could be very, very strong. But there is at least one instant speed wheel that I know of. It's the Addendum card, but it's like 7 mana in white and blue. I don't think that's worth it. But Smothering Tithe, regardless, can be very, very strong in your deck, and I would be very, very interested in putting it in here. As long as you don't play the anime girl one, this one, I think, this is Rumpelstiltskin, right? He weaves, yeah, that's the story, right? He weaves hay into gold. And then he's muttering about how he's so clever, no one will guess his name. And then he says his name. This guy was dumb. Yeah, so Smothering Tithe, easy. And here's the trickier one, but really, like, very attractive to me. It's Strionic Resonator. Now, I don't really like this card. 9 times out of 10, I really don't like this card. I find, to be honest, a lot of doublers don't do enough. They're very niche, and they only work when you're ahead or you're building, and they're targets for removal, etc., etc. But Strionic Resonator is really interesting in this deck because it does a lot. Namely, with our commander. Not only can you copy the triggered ability of the multicast so that you can exile more cards. How would this look, right? You would need to. Okay, so here's what you can do. Okay, sorry, I had to do the math. So you have Zethy. Let's say you have 7 mana. What you can do, and Strionic Resonator, what you can do is cast Zethy, multi-kick twice, and hold up the 2 mana for Strionic. And while that mana is up, you can hold up Countermagic, so that no one can counter Zethy on the way down, if that's what you're worried about. Zethy comes into play, her ETB triggers, then instead you use the Strionic, double the number of, double that trigger, so you get another 2, which basically pays for itself, which allowed you to hold up mana while it's on the stack. Now, that only really works, that's only really notable in places where you're worried about Countermagic more than removal, but that does happen, and I think that's a pretty cool protection kind of trick you can do. However, the second you have more mana and you're pouring, like, if you pour 1 more multi-kicker, if you do 3 multi-kickers, then it becomes, it becomes a profit to use the Resonator, which I really, really like. And then when you're going nuts, when you have tons and tons of mana, like you've cast High Tide and you're using this, you're going to get a lot. You're basically going to exile all the instants in your graveyard. Really, really like that. But that's more niche. Obviously, the much more interesting way to use this is you cast Strionic Resonator and use its ability. Where's our commander? Use its ability on the attack trigger, right? And on the attack trigger, then you're going to be much happier because you basically get to cast every single one of these spells twice, which if you have the mana, you can really do some crazy stuff with. Especially when you get to use cards such as Frantic Search, which is one of the best ones in the deck because it lets you. Should we be playing Unwind? No, we need to target. Actually, let's talk about that in a second. Because it untaps lands, and if you can reduce the cost at all, then you're going positive on mana, or if you're using it with High Tide, it becomes really, really strong, and I do like that. What about Unwind? This is tough. I'm thinking about this really hard. So Unwind, if you can reduce the cost, you have to counter your own spell, which isn't ideal, but if you can get this down to 1 mana, you cast like Opt, you then target it with Unwind, you get a net positive of 1 additional mana because you paid 2 and you untap 3. If you have High Tide out, then it gets even better. I think this is worth trying. This is really interesting. I think this is definitely worth trying if you are able to, because you can just use this as counter magic, right? And that's fine. This is really interesting. Play this. I think this could be really, really good on turns where you get to do stupid things like generate tons and tons of mana. Yeah. Yeah, this is interesting. Okay, if you can get High Tide in this and you have like 1 other spell, I think, and you could reduce the mana, I think this could be really, really cool. And as it works as another copy of Frantic Search, I think it's just going to be very, very strong. All right. All right. So that was, anyways, going back to Strionic, you can imagine all the other ways this is just good in your deck, but I think those 2 are good enough to do some really, really fun things. And after that, obviously, we have things such as drawing an extra card, to getting an extra Nimbus trigger. Like these aren't that strong because they're really easy to trigger, but I do think they're still worthwhile. If you're low on cards, this can make a big difference. And depending, I guess the only other thing is Mercurial Spelldancer, but I still think that's enough. I think that's interesting. And I think there's a few other things that maybe you can do with this. Sphinx's Bone Wand, Aether Flux, it's triggered, or is it activated as well? No, it's just triggered. Okay. So the Sphinx Bone Wand, and I think that's it. Oh, and the Sentinel Tower. But I do think this is interesting. I think it's definitely worth playing the Resonator. I think it's a very cool card. But that's basically where I'm going to finish my review or my assist. I think this deck is really, really cool. I really do like Chun-Li, and I really like Zethy as Chun-Li. I love that she has two swords. I keep thinking this is like in its scabbard, but it's not. Just the way she's holding it and the way the lighting works. But very, very cool. You love a person who mainly casts spells but carries around 2 swords. That's pretty awesome. Also, her books are chained to her. What a cool concept of a character. Yeah, I love this deck. I think it's in a really, really good place. I think after this, the next step is budget and thinking about how much stronger we want to make it, because obviously then we can start putting some really good generically strong stuff. I haven't mentioned it here, but Ledger Shredder could be really good. You know, we got Esper Sentinel, Ristic Study. Those kind of classic, powerful cards can fit into this deck really, really well and give you kind of a buffer that when the Zethy plan isn't taking off, you at least can generate some advantage that way. So until then, thank you so much, Shirok, for supporting the channel. Thank you so much for sending this deck, honestly. It's really, really cool. And I look forward to seeing another draft of it, or, a draft of any other deck, which you can send me if you look into the video description and find the forum down here. I said I would automate the endings, but I never got to that. I don't know if I will. I probably should. But with that in mind, if you like to like, comment, subscribe, do the whole YouTube thing, I'd be very, very grateful. And yeah, I do really like this deck, and I look forward to seeing it. Good luck building it, and good luck kicking your opponents.